I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Darfur and the media. Who is getting the story right? Who is shying away from it? Are celebrities and the prominence they bring to the story getting in the way of the truth?
Enough is enough.
Plus, 5 things you never knew about the media in Sudan. And some rock and roll minus the human element. Welcome back. This week's broadcast is devoted to one of the world's biggest stories, the one unfolding in Africa's largest country, Sudan. We're looking at Darfur, a human tragedy that Washington calls a genocide, but that the Sudanese government in Khartoum prefers to call a civil war. What about the media's portrayal of the story? How does it differ depending on who's doing the reporting? Some people argue that reporters and celebrities often, with the best of intentions, have actually made things worse in Darfur. First, a short history of the conflict. Fighting broke out in the western region of Darfur in 2003 following 2 decades of civil war between the north and south of the country that had already claimed 1.5 million lives. The Darfur conflict pitted forces of the government, which is led by Arabic-speaking Sudanese, against local rebels who are non-Arabic speaking. The UN says more than 200,000 people have been killed in Darfur. Another 2 million plus have fled their homes. The International Criminal Court has likened aspects of the Sudanese government's policies in Darfur to those of Nazi Germany and wants to put some Sudanese government officials on trial. In the first part of our program, we'll look at the Western media's approach to Darfur, how the story is being told, and has the reporting helped or hindered our understanding of a bloody and tragic conflict.
The International Criminal Court prosecutor has accused Sudan's entire state apparatus of war crimes.
Pro-government Arab militias known as the Janjaweed are accused of carrying out a campaign of ethnic cleansing against non-Arab groups.
Victims of the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Millions of people displaced, hundreds of thousands dead, distant politicians issuing judgments from the West.
My administration has called these actions by their rightful name: genocide.
And Hollywood celebrities weighing in on complex political and humanitarian issues. These are just some of the images that we've come to associate with Darfur through the global media. But are the media reporting the story or distorting it?
Journalists have to do more than just simply report the facts on the ground. The human story and the story of disaster and atrocity and suffering is very, very important, obviously. But it can't be just put in a vacuum. It's not an earthquake or a tsunami or a cyclone that's causing the problem in Darfur. It is man-made, and therefore one has to look at the context. What has made people behave in this way?
That's the primary criticism of the coverage of the Darfur story, the relative absence of context.
The media look at what is happening today. They don't go and research to the root causes. The media, they bring news. And it's only those researchers who can go and dig the reasons why. But the media is to show what is happening.
Hi, everyone. This is Global Days for Darfur Week, and churches, synagogues, and schools are rallying to protest Sudan's genocidal regime.
I saw several girls raped.
Raped right in front of my eyes.
Then they burned them to death.
Darfur in the American imagination today is a place without history, without politics. It's simply a moral site, a site where perpetrator targets victim, a site where atrocities happen, which has no understandable motivation at all. It is the site where evil is present. That's an agenda.
Action desperately needs to take its place.
The conflict in Darfur, which was at its worst in 2003 and 2004, is not just about local rebels who don't speak Arabic fighting the forces of the country's Arabic-speaking government. It's an economic conflict that has much more to do with oil and other resources than language. And at the outset, the rebels outflanked their enemies in the propaganda war, the framing of the media narrative.
At the beginning of the conflict, the government didn't speak out as much as it could have done. And the rebels were much better at their kind of, propaganda and pushing themselves forward in terms of calling out the media all the time than the government were.
The Sudanese government do feel under tremendous pressure from the Western media. And so as a result of this, what happens, they put up barriers. They stop handing out journalist permits. They make it very difficult for the media to operate in Sudan.
We are not able to protect our citizens. How can we do to protect others who are coming from outside?
The media has been emphasizing the tragedy because the war in Darfur has produced lots of tragedies. There were, first of all, 3.5 million people running away from their homes, staying in camps, very bad camps. Now that's exciting for the media.
Images are from camps where tens of thousands of refugees have come to escape the genocide that's claimed at least 200,000 victims.
The images beamed out of Darfur trigger an understandable impulse in the West for intervention. However, the prospect of that intervention has an impact on the ground and at the negotiating table.
The media demands a foreign intervention, and the demand for a foreign intervention, instead of driving the rebel movements to the conference table, emboldens them to simply wait it out until the foreign intervention is there in Darfur, and instead of peace, they will have power. The media bears an indirect responsibility in making the rebel movements think that this is actually a feasible alternative.
Organizers of rallies around the world this weekend are calling for the United Nations to intervene.
Having got the context of the war wrong at the beginning, they then ignored the options for peace, because particularly for TV, footage, it's much more exciting to have sort of refugee camps, fighting, people on camelback, janjaweed, government troops, planes in the sky, and so on, rather than what are rather visually boring issues, which are peace talks and men in suits coming in and out of fancy hotels.
The peace process has been going on for quite some time. It's a very real thing. And quite often there's a certain characterization in the media that there's wars in a distant part of Africa, they're left run to run and run. This simply is not the case.
Then there's the celebrity factor. Well-known, well-intentioned, but not necessarily well-informed movie stars drawing attention to some of the Darfur story, but not all of it.
Enough is enough.
There's a bit of soft news and a bit of hard news rolled into one. Two birds with one stone. Horrible events explained by beautiful people. I mean, the media love that sort of thing. Furthermore, Darfur has a massive grassroots movement, particularly in the US. It's very slick, well-run, and the media reach is excellent.
What do you think the heart of the problem is?
You have a government, the government of Sudan, with genocidal ambitions.
All this talk about genocide refers really to the years 2004 and 2003, when the mass displacement happened and some of the worst killing happened. And the story now is that there's a huge UN aid effort. It's one of the biggest humanitarian aid efforts in the world. There's almost nobody dying of starvation. The idea that people are dying like flies because they've been sent from their homes and they're sort of wandering aimlessly through the desert in search of water, I mean, that is just not true.
When celebrities get involved who might not know so much about the conflict, and then it can get dangerous in that you get a massive hype without any focus, and that would be a negative thing for Darfur, because it will do nothing but annoy the government and demonize the government to a certain extent.
Long on pictures and reliant on celebrity. Short on context and explanation. That's the story, as told by the Western news media, of Darfur. Our Global Village Voice is now on Darfur and the Western media's take on the conflict there.
I think in terms of the British stroke European media, there has been an awareness, a dawning realization that this situation is incredibly complex and it's not necessarily as black and white as it was originally portrayed. And I think that is filtering through to the public, and I think it's starting to affect the way the public view the story. Most people understand that they don't quite get the situation in Darfur with all of its complexities. And you couple that with the fact that the story, not only has the story not really moved on, but the pictures haven't moved on. So people are kind of switching on their television screens, they're opening their newspapers and they're seeing the exact same pictures that they were seeing 4 years ago. And I think it's very difficult to maintain that degree of interest if nothing's changed.
The media coverage of Darfur has been quite extensive over the many years. People are actually getting low media fatigue, they're getting news fatigue, because all they see are the same pictures time and time again. People dying, atrocities, rebel gangs, corrupt governments. They see all kinds of things which are not really pleasant to see. And yet, what is happening? And these things would make a real difference if something positive could be the result.
When you look at the media coverage on Darfur, I think it's important to remember that there's one big problem. It only talks about Darfur. Time and again, the media has given us pictures of a bloody conflict over there, but it has failed to give us a broader picture. Darfur is not a country, it's part of Sudan, and in Sudan we have a conflict between North and South. that has endured for more than 2 decades. Currently there's a fragile peace process underway and there's real progress being made. Unfortunately, the media coverage in Darfur has given an excuse to the parties not to implement its provisions.
Our Global Village Voice platform gives you the chance to vent your frustrations with and share your views on the news media wherever you are in the world. Email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net and we'll find a way to get your voice on the air. Now it's time for a special feature, the Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi, with 5 things you need to know about the media in Sudan.
Radio in Sudan is a near-state monopoly. The Sudan Radio and Television Corporation monitors all content that goes out on air, and it also controls broadcast licenses. The country's few private radio stations steer away from news and current affairs and base their programming around entertainment. For those in the opposition, licenses are hard to come by, and channels like The Voice of Freedom and Renewal and The Voice of Sudan broadcast from outside the country through shortwave radio. International broadcasters like Deutsche Welle and BBC World Service are also available to the Sudanese through shortwave. Television in Sudan is completely state-run, and in this country with a population of over 38 million, the latest estimates say that there are just about 2.5 million television sets countrywide. With an average annual income of just $330 and a civil war that was fought for nearly 20 years, it's no surprise that TV ownership is so low. But it could also be that there's really not much to watch. Sudan is Africa's largest country, but it has only 3 television stations. Sudan's permanent military censor is proving to be very effective. The body ensures that the news reflects official views. And according to the US-based Committee for the Protection of Journalists, the close watch on TV news output has meant that many Sudanese people have no accurate information on the extent of the violence in Darfur. In comparison to the heavy controls on radio and television, Sudanese print media face fewer restrictions. With distribution levels low and poor literacy in the country, the government has found fewer reasons to clamp down. There are over 25 newspapers published in Arabic and English in the country, and private ownership of newspapers is common. Independent newspapers such as Al Sahafa and Al Sudani have produced some daring coverage of sensitive topics such as government corruption and failings with the security services. Add it all up, and Sudan comes in at 140th out of 169 countries on Reporters Without Borders' 2007 Index on Press Freedom. That's 1 place lower than it was last year.
We're back after the break with more on Darfur and how the Arab media report the conflict there.